Welcome to Weekly Talkback. I'm Kevin Beers,
And I'm David Witten.
and this is the show where we get to talk to Pastor Dave about his message from Sunday. This Sunday was March 10th, 2024, and the name of the message was Relationship, Not Ritual. And I will say, as I was getting things ready for the church service, and I mentioned this before, I always read through the sermon so I get a flavor for what's going on. And when I read the title, I was really intrigued by that, exactly what that meant. So we're going to get into it today a little bit.
Okay.
Just a little synopsis of what that message was about. Basically, Jesus breaks a lot of rules in order to provide love and relationship to people. For instance, the one instance that you bring up is there's a man with a withered hand, and everybody's watching Jesus. Is he going to heal this man on the Sabbath? Because the ritual is the Sabbath, you do no work, and healing was considered work.
Hmm.
So Jesus went against that and healed the man, but he prefaced it with, is it, do you do good on the Sabbath or do you do evil? You know,
Right.
which one do you really do? And what they were basically, they weren't saying you don't do evil, but they were saying you don't even do good because it's work.
Hmm.
And so he defied the 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 chief priests, the Pharisees, everybody who were living by these other laws.
Hmm.
So this brought up a question, and actually brought up a conversation since Sunday. Um, my question is, Paul tells us that we have to respect the government. The government is instituted by God. Therefore, we have to follow what the government tells us, whether they're harsh or whether they're friendly. It
Hmm.
doesn't matter. We need to follow them. But at the same time, and as you say it, Jesus purposely broke the laws to prove a bigger point. So then that brought up a question for me of, when is it okay to break the law, and when do you need to follow it? So the entire world's waiting for your answer, Dave.
Well, yeah, that's rather complicated, and I'm not sure how to handle that. I see a little bit of a difference in government law and religious law. Now, back during Jesus's time, there was Roman law and there was Jewish law. The Jewish laws were more the ritualistic things that Jews did according to their faith. Civil law was kind of a completely different thing, particularly when it related to the Roman Empire. Um, but I would challenge, I guess I would challenge Paul. Paul seems to be a little bit more concerned about obeying whatever government you're under um, than Jesus is. Now, you may challenge me on that, but I do think that Paul was a little bit more status quo when it came to the government, and I think Jesus was a little bit more radical in his thinking. Um, Last week, not this past Sunday, but the week before, we talked about, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God. And I think that was essentially a very nuanced comment saying government really doesn't owe, you don't owe the government anything but this coin, but you owe God everything because everything belongs to God. And in much the same way, I guess I kind of feel about your question. I mean, I think if you're under um, a corrupt government, I do think that you have a right to speak out against it. And that may be breaking the law.
Okay.
Does that make, I mean, and I don't have any biblical references to provide proof of that, except, for our conversation from yesterday, that Jesus challenged their law and kind of ranked the law, the Jewish law, saying that some laws were more important to follow than other laws. And he used the Sabbath as an instant as an example for that.
Mhm. Well, wouldn't Paul have I don't know if he actually points it out or not. I don't think he does. But King David was anointed king while Saul was still alive. And David even mentions essentially, I can't I can't take Saul out while I'm the rightful king. As long as Saul lives, I have to live under his government. Like he can't exert his authority, even though David is the rightful king at that point in time, because
Yeah.
Saul was appointed king, selected by God.
Hmm.
Uh, so that's almost an example that supports what Paul was saying.
Yeah.
Um, my question often comes down to, well, if civil law violates God's law, we got to follow God's law, obviously. I think
Well,
that's an obvious thing.
yeah. I think that's a good an equation to follow. I think that's perfect. Um, you answered your own question very well.
But at the same time, um, people interpret scripture differently. So someone might say, well, that law violates God's law. And I might say, well, no, actually, it doesn't. Like we might have a different. So if we see it differently, then again, how do you, what does that really come down to? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. Like I asked the question because I've considered this question many times throughout my life. And it's like, how do you know when you're doing the right thing? You know,
Hmm. Yeah. And again, I think what I think you're trying to do is in that question, what you're doing is you're extending a principle that's found within Judaism to a more civil situation.
mm, okay,
And and I guess my question is, can you do that? I think the government does things that I, as a Christian, wouldn't do. You know,
mhm,
I wouldn't, I'm a pacifist, so I would not choose to carry an arm into combat on behalf of my government. But I do support the idea that in certain situations, the government needs to step in and stop evil from happening. World War II being, probably the best example of that.
right.
We needed to go in there. I would support the government in the sense that I probably would go into the military, but I would choose a non-combatant role if I could as a pacifist. I think in yesterday's or in Sunday's sermon, I think when we're talking about relationship to ritual and the need to break law, I really feel like that needed to be confined within religious law and not
Okay.
necessarily government law.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, yeah, because I didn't. Yeah, and I see where you said that, and I guess I blew it up into a little broader topic,
Yeah,
what you really meant it to be.
yeah,
But at the same time, I think it's another topic that definitely worth talking about, whether or not civil law, if we follow that, um, because there are things I've seen churches that become very legalistic in many respects. Like there's certain ways that you need to do things. Uh, the Brethren Church that I came from in Pennsylvania, when it was Love Feast, if the women didn't have a prayer cap with them, they were handed one because you were going to wear that no matter what.
whether you liked it or not,
Exactly.
huh?
I mean that was kind of an unwritten law.
Yeah.
And there was a young woman who she's like, I'm not wearing it. Like I'm here for Love Feast, but I am not wearing the prayer cap. I don't like she just didn't see the need for that. Once she
Well,
once she did that, other women in the church began not wearing the prayer cap to Love Feast.
Well, I think that's an example of what Jesus was talking about on Sunday, in the sense that that was a traditional ritual of your congregation, and those people within that congregation felt it to be law, and she challenged it. And she challenged it rightly, because technically, why why would you be forced to wear a covering during love feast, but not a covering at other times
And and that
in
was
worship, or even, I mean, some of the older old order groups would wear it continually. So, the challenge would be, why is it so necessary to wear one during love feast? Show it to me. Give me biblical evidence that it's important to do it.
right. And and that was part of her argument was when I come here on Sunday morning, I don't wear one. You don't force me to wear one, but for Love Feast, you do. Like, what?
Yeah,
Like, I don't understand the double standard there.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, and and that she can be faithful. Um, Devout Christian. There was no doubt. That she was. She showed it in word and deed that
right,
she was devout,
right,
but she didn't wear the prayer covering, and she didn't want to,
right.
and she refused to do it. And sometimes I wonder about that. A lot of churches will have these legalistic things that are kind of built in, tradition
Yeah,
essentially,
yeah,
which make the church unwelcoming to visitors. I know, like, if I go to, I've been to some Catholic services. I don't, I have no clue what's going on. Everybody else knows exactly what's going on. That's what they grew up with. It's just the way things are. And I wasn't given a program to understand what was happening. And I didn't feel, I don't want to say I didn't feel welcome. The people were all nice enough. It wasn't that, but the rituals made me feel like an outcast, essentially.
Well, and I think that's another good point that you bring up, because that particular case you're talking about, ritual versus relationship, in the Catholic Mass, the ritual is what they come for,
Mhm.
not the relationship. Whereas a more low church kind of setting like us, we come for the relationship, not necessarily for the ritual. And that's why I think people, when they go to a Catholic Mass, they find the people not really friendly, because they're not there for that. They're there because of the horizontal relationship. They want to take communion. They want to hear the Mass, and that's what they're there for. They're not there to make friends.
Right, right. And in Catholic in the Catholic Mass, as I understand it, the Mass is the important piece, not the
Yeah,
people.
exactly. Mass is the climax of the service.
Right. And
Hmm.
and for the brethren, it, this is when the community gets together,
Right,
you know,
right.
and I've heard people say, well, they're not necessarily Christian. They'll even admit, like, well, I don't necessarily I'm not necessarily Christian. I don't really believe God was, Jesus was God's son, but this is a community, and I grew up in this type of community. I just want to still be part of the community.
Yeah,
So it's
exactly.
far more about relationship. Now, hopefully, that relationship fosters a faith, and um, that's a topic for another day. We try to keep these things to a certain
Yeah, yeah.
time.
No, but it comes back around to kind of the summary of my sermon on Sunday, in that the church serves us as Christians as a third place.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think that from what I understand, we need a place other than our home place and our work or school place. We need another place to develop a social identity, and that seems to be the struggle in our society today, where this loneliness pandemic is taking place, because people don't have a third place to go and just be themselves and feel embraced and accepted and welcomed and belong, belonging in an environment that they don't have, and church serves that purpose very well for us. And I said in the sermon that church should find those third places out there and be involved in in a way of establishing relationships.
Yeah, there was a video sometime back. If I find the video, I will link it down in the description. It's of a man who was at a bar the night before. He wandered into church, and he he still smelled like alcohol. And the people in the church essentially avoided him. And he went back to the bar because at the bar he was accepted,
Hmm.
and the church did not accept him. And then that the video itself, it's a great video. It really talks about the church needs to be, it needs to welcome people in no matter what their situation is really what it was all about.
Yeah, yeah,
And that I think is almost the essence of your sermon,
yeah.
really.
It is. I mean, that's another good example. You're bringing up wonderful examples, Kevin.
I'm coming for your job, Dave.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Exactly.
Okay. All right. Well, we will wrap it up there. If you did not hear Dave's message from Sunday, I will link it down in the description. I will also search for that video and link that down in the description. And then drop your comments. Let us know what you're thinking. If once you got to hear the message, tell us what you think about it. We really want
Mhm.
to know that. And we will see you next week.
Be blessed.